the 8 suspected ISIS terrorists entered the United States illegally through our southern border. Even worse, they'd actually been apprehended at the border, but were then released into the United States by law enforcement authorities who say they detected no red flags among the men at the time. Welcome to Stakelbeck Tonight. I'm Erick Stakelbeck, and ISIS is not dead. In fact, members of the notorious terror group are apparently active right here in the United States. On Tuesday, U.S. authorities announced that 8 men with suspected ties to ISIS have been arrested in raids spanning 3 U.S. cities: New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. And here's the kicker. The 8 suspected ISIS terrorists entered the United States illegally through our southern border. Even worse, they'd actually been apprehended at the border, but were then released into the United States by law enforcement authorities who say they detected no red flags among the men at the time. So, hey, just let them go and fan out across the country, even though they hail from Tajikistan, a Central Asian nation that has become a major recruiting ground for ISIS-K, the group's Afghan offshoot. In March, Tajik nationals led the horrific ISIS-K terror attack on a Moscow concert hall that left 145 people dead. Now, U.S. officials have warned in recent months that terrorists could seek to carry out a Moscow-style attack here on U.S. soil. And that obviously becomes a lot more likely when our southern border has basically become a flashing neon sign encouraging anyone and everyone to enter. After all, while you might get caught, there's a very good chance you could simply be released into society and disappear. Some 10 million people have entered the U.S. illegally through our southern border since Joe Biden took office. Our Stakelbeck Tonight team was there in April, and we heard from law enforcement authorities how they've apprehended waves of people from the Middle East and China, from nations that are hostile to the United States. Folks, bottom line, our border is a disaster waiting to happen. As for ISIS, President Trump ordered U.S. forces to crush the group in Iraq and Syria during his term, and that's exactly what happened. And then President Biden ordered a chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, and voila, ISIS-K began to rear its head in a major way. So we've got the ISIS threat, and then we've got supporters of Hamas running wild in America's streets. We showed you what happened outside the White House over the weekend when mobs called for the death of Israeli soldiers and praised Hamas and Hezbollah. Well, on Monday, these terror supporters were at it once again in New York City, waving Hamas and Hezbollah flags outside an exhibit honoring victims of the October 7th massacre. It doesn't get more evil than that. Folks, it's been 8 months since Hamas terrorists invaded southern Israel and slaughtered 1,200 people in the worst massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Yet it seems that many have forgotten what happened that day, or worse, even turned Israel into the villain and not the victim of October 7th. That's why Dan Gordon knew he needed to take action. He's the award-winning Israeli-American filmmaker and screenwriter behind the brand-new documentary series, October 7th, 2023. It's a 4-part series that debuts right here on TBN this Friday night, June 14th, and Dan joined me a short while ago to talk about it. Take a look. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Hey, we want to talk about your great new 4-part documentary series right here on TBN. It's called October 7th, 2023. But first, Dan, what do you make in the wake of October 7th? As you said, the most heinous massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And yet, the world seems to be turning its attention, its ire, not towards Hamas, but more and more towards Israel, including on college campuses right here in the United States. What has been your sense watching all that unfold while you're putting together a documentary series documenting the pure evil and savagery of October 7th?
It's actually the reason that I wanted to do the documentary series. On October 8th, less than 24 hours after the attack, while the slaughter was still going on, because Hamas isn't just a terrorist movement. Gaza was a de facto terrorist state and enjoys all the characteristics of a state: fixed borders, stable population, strong central government, a strong military force, and an independent foreign policy. And Israel left Gaza in 2005. The borders were controlled not by Israel, but by Hamas and by Egypt on their side, and by Hamas and Israel on our side. So this was a de facto independent state which invaded Israel on October 7th. They captured territory and held it for 3 days. So while Hamas is still engaged in slaughtering people, while they're still inside of Israel, on October 8th, demonstrations happened all over the world, not calling for a ceasefire because Hamas was winning at that time. Instead, they were in solidarity with what they said was a brilliant counteroffensive by Palestinians who struck back at their colonial settler occupiers and oppressors. And I knew that within days, not weeks, the narrative would shift from Israel having been attacked to Israel being guilty of genocide. And that was really the reason that I wanted to do the documentary. So the documentary has 4 parts to it. The first is called The Horror, and it recounts what happened on October 7th, but it also talks about the stories of heroism that were extraordinary, where people refused to be victims, where ordinary citizens, when the army failed and the intelligence service failed, ordinary citizens, individual soldiers, police, paramedics, grandparents, took up arms to defend themselves, save themselves, their families, their neighbors, and complete strangers. So that's episode 1, The Horror, which will be on June 14th. That then leads into the second episode, which is called The Heroism. And those are some of the most incredible stories of heroism you'll ever hear. And what makes them so impactful is they're not about Rambos. They're about ordinary people who did extraordinary things. The third episode is called Hysteria, Hatred, and History. And it talks about exactly what we were just mentioning, the hysteria that has gone on about Israel being the genocidal murderer, and a total distortion of the history of that region and what this conflict is about. And it sets the record straight on that. And then the final episode is called The Hope. What is the hope for the day after? What's the solution? Is it a 2-state solution? Or is it something different? Maybe it's an 8-state solution, which is a very innovative approach that we look into. And we also uncover the fact that the education that these terrorists have received, the education for jihad and terrorism, they received in UN schools, which are paid for by American taxpayers. So American taxpayers, without knowing it, were paying to educate generations for jihad, which destabilizes the Middle East, causes oil prices to go up, increases our inflation, makes America's quality of life worse, and endangers the United States, and American taxpayers are paying for that privilege.
Dan, this is just incredible information, and we can't wait to watch starting this Friday, June 14th, June 21st, the 28th, and then wrapping on July 5th. Stakelbeck Tonight, my all-new nightly series on current events through a bold biblical lens. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching, and God bless.